Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out about over the past week. Except for this first one's going to be a little bit different because we're going to be starting off this video with a small giveaway. We did run a giveaway for the game Storyberg a few weeks ago, and we did already draw the winner for that, but the publisher reached out to me and mentioned that they wanted to reward anyone that entered that giveaway by offering them a free add-on to their pledge. So if you did pledge for this, or if you're interested in pledging for this, I'll leave the full details in a pinned comment down below along with links to that previous video just so you can find everything as quickly as possible. But this is just a nice gesture from the publisher, so I just want to thank him for doing all of this, and I hope that a lot of you find this useful. This next one is more in line with our regular news, and that's that there is a new campaign announced for a deluxe reprint of the game Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea. This is a game that's designed by Scott Almes, which is a very popular designer, and this is one of his more popular games. Of course, he's more well known for being the designer of the Tiny Epic series, and this one is pretty epic, but it's definitely not tiny. This one is a 4X game, and it's got a lot of very positive reviews, and it has launched a deluxeified version before, but over on Kickstarter. So if you missed out on that, or if you're interested to see what this new campaign's adding, this is definitely one to look forward to, and you can find it on GameFound now. Doesn't look like I have an exact date for this one yet, but I am expecting it before the end of the year. But of course, if you want to hear all the details of this when it actually launches, feel free to subscribe and I will cover it in more detail during the week of its launch. The last thing I want to mention is also not exactly in line with our usual news, but I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to the game Paleo Payout because this is a campaign that launched last week and they did submit the details for me to cover it, but because of a bug in my spreadsheet, I didn't actually see that it was launching, so I do want to do this game justice and let you know that it did launch, and luckily I did put coverage out for this one previously, so I'll just go and roll that footage for you now. So if you are interested in this game and you're interested in the details, it did launch last week, and this is how it plays. And this is a set collection game where players are going to be trying to collect different treasures and relics in order to score the most victory points. Players are going to be drawing cards from a shared deck every round, drawing things like fossils, relics, and rare insect cards. And these cards are going to grant different point values, special effects, or actions that players can perform on their turn. There's also a special card known as the Dig Kit, and this comes into play when collecting the treasure cards. And there's 6 treasure cards in a game, and they're placed out separate from the deck, and once all those treasure cards are depleted, that's going to trigger the end of the game. So if you do have a Dig Kit, that does give you a little bit more power because it's going to allow you to throttle how quickly or how slowly you want the game to come to an end. If you got a bit of catching up to do, you might want to delay that as much as possible, but if you are currently the player that's ahead, that's going to incentivize you to try and grab those treasure cards as quickly as possible. Each player's turn within a round allows that player to play one card from their hand, gaining any points that that card might issue for that round and also performing any special effects. And the goal of each round is to try and have the most points at the end of the round because each round also has an active buyer card specific for that round, and whichever player has the highest points is going to be the one to acquire that card. These cards are important because they give you different scoring objectives and opportunities to gain victory points, which is really nice if you want to be the winner at the end of the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can check out the link to the campaign in the description below, where you can click to get notified. Other than that, I did have some audio issues in my previous video, so I switched out my new mic for my old mic. I don't know if the mic was the issue. I'm kind of hoping it's not because I don't want my new mic to be broken already. It's probably something else along the lines, whether it's the cable or my audio interface or maybe even the laptop jack. So I don't know what it is, but if we do get some static in this video, it kind of comes and goes, so it's really hard for me to replicate or pinpoint. Well, at least we know it's not the mic, and I'll have to keep swapping things out till it goes away. As always, I do like to make a quick mention out to Alex over at Board Game Co. because we do work together keeping track of all these campaigns, and then we keep each other updated throughout the week and the month so that he can offer you the best footage that he can, giving you the games that are launching for that month, because he puts out a video at the start of each month letting you know of the games to come, And then of course I do these videos every week to keep you updated with all the changes and to give you a little bit more details into those individual games. Alex also does way more content than I do, and he offers a ton of variety, really focusing on the value proposition of games, but also offering you reviews and playthroughs and commentary on the industry. So if you're interested in any of that and you haven't checked him out yet, definitely feel free to check out his channel and subscribe if you do like his content. I'll have a link to his channel in the description below, but he has fantastic content and he's a great guy, so I'm happy to recommend him, and I hope you enjoy what he has to offer. And if you're already a fan of Alex or any other content creators in the space, I do know a lot of us are going to be heading over to PAX Unplugged from December 1st to 3rd over in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am planning on going, but I'm still kind of figuring it out, so I don't want to say that I'm going yet because I don't have a flight booked and I don't have a hotel booked, and I also don't have my time off booked, but I am trying to work on all these things, and I do plan on going and I do hope to go. So as long as everything goes smoothly there, you might be able to find me there as well. But with the amount of people that I already know that are going to be attending this, I think it's going to be a ton of fun, because that's really what makes these conventions worth it to me, is just meeting people and seeing my friends that I don't really get to see that often. So it's always a privilege to meet any of you from the community as well as other content creators, and I really hope to make it, and I will keep you updated on that. And that's it for an intro, and we do have quite a lot of games launching this week. I don't know how late this is going to keep me up tonight, but luckily I did sneak a nap in earlier today, so I should be able to make it, but let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on October 16th, and this one's called Villagers of the Oak Dell, and this plays 1 to 100 players and takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play. And whenever you see a giant player count like that, it usually indicates that it's a roll and write with simultaneous play, and this is the case, because this one looks like a really interesting roll and write where each player is going to have their own pad of paper. And the game plays over 12 rounds, but each round you're going to be rolling a pool of dice. And there's going to be dice of a few different colors, with each of the colors being associated with a certain quadrant on the action track. Each of the quadrants are also broken down into smaller segments, with each of those segments being associated with a different value of the die, and of course offering you different actions to choose from. But what most of these actions are going to do is grant you resources that you'll then be able to cross out on your own personal player sheet. But there's a bunch of different resources you can gain. There's the pickaxe that allows you to fill in different cells within the mine section, which will grant you victory points for filling in different rows and columns. And of course, there are certain areas that will grant you other resources, so there is a cascading effect that can happen, because when you fill that in, you'll be able to gain access to that other resource, which can allow you to fill in more cells on the sheet. And this concept does exist in other areas you'll be filling in as well. The wood resource allows you to expand your town, but then also to build buildings around the perimeter of your board. And the nice thing about building these is that building production is going to be triggered on certain rounds throughout the game, which means that the more buildings you have built earlier, the more benefit you'll get from them over the entirety of the game. But there is one more thing you have to do in order to build your buildings, and that's to unlock those building locations. And in order to do this, you'll be using the roads resource, which will allow you to fill in different paths along the road, reaching these different flags which represent the building locations. But then you'll also be gaining any bonuses from icons that you're able to reach, as well as bonuses for surrounding complete sections of the land. And the last resource we have is an interesting one, because this one is actually the villager resource. And this one can be used in one of two ways. It can either be used as a worker or as a knight. If you're going to be using it as a worker, you're going to be filling in one of these villager spaces. At the end of the round, you're going to be moving up this track equal to the number of the workers that you have filled in that row. But the nice thing about this is that those workers go to work every single round. So if you fill in all 3 of those, you're going to be moving up 3 points on that track every single round. And you can probably see that you'll probably end up maxing out that track pretty quickly if you do get 3 workers there. But if that's the case, you're actually going to be earning gold for each space that you can't move up that track, which is going to earn you victory points at the end of the game. One thing to note here is that each of these rows are also associated with a different color die, and they're only going to be activated when that associated die is chosen for that round. So even if you fill up one of your rows with 3 different workers, if you don't choose that die, that track is not going to move up. But now let's get over to how the knights work, which are going to be protecting you from attacks throughout the game, which, if they go unprotected, will give you negative victory points at the end of the game, because anytime that a 1 is rolled on any of the 4 die, it's going to be causing an attack to all of the players, and to indicate that, you're going to be filling in the sword icon at the top of the board. But if you spend one of your villagers as a knight, you'll be able to fill in the next knight on that bottom row, and anytime that your knights are ahead of the swords, that means that you're completely defending against all of the existing attacks. But the game essentially continues like this, with players rolling their dice and then using those dice to perform various actions out on their sheets. And like I said, there'll be a ton of cascading effects, and there will also be some objective cards that players will be trying to complete throughout the game as well, which will kind of change your strategy from game to game. And those do grant you additional victory points if you are able to complete them. So if this one does sound interesting to you, you can definitely check it out. I have it linked in the description below. And of course, you can click to get notified. And the next campaign we have also launches on the 16th, and this one's called Android Farmer Electric Sheep. And this is a game for 2 players that takes just 15 to 25 minutes to play. And this one is also a roll and write, and this one is also a print and play, which works really well for roll and writes, and it also makes the game quite affordable if you are interested in this one. But in this game, players are android farmers farming those electric sheep that are of course needed for robots to dream. Each player starts the game with their own player sheet, and you're going to be trying to fill in as many of these sheep as possible in order to try and score the most victory points at the end of the game. The way that you do this is over a series of rounds, because every single round a pool of dice is going to be rolled, and then players are going to be taking turns drafting a die into their possession until they have a total of 2 dice each. The total of the values of the dice that you drafted are going to indicate which column you'll be able to fill in a sheep, with each of these columns being associated with 1 or 2 numbers. Obviously, 7 is the most common number to roll when you're rolling 2 dice and adding them together, but then every other column does have multiple values that you could roll. But whatever total you rolled, you'll be able to fill in a sheep in that associated column, assuming that there's still sheep there available, unless they're one of these darker sheep, because these sheep are actually protected behind encryption, and you'll have to unlock them before you'll be able to cross them off. But luckily, there is an action to be able to do that. You'll be able to take an action every single turn, but the action that you'll be able to take is completely dependent on the first die that you drafted, because each of these actions that are offered in the game are going to be also associated with a value of a die. This means that you do have some interesting decisions to make when you draft your die, because you are trying to get a certain total to be able to cross off the sheep that you're trying to cross off. But then you're also trying to weigh that with getting the appropriate actions that you need depending on your current situation in the game. Most of these actions will have you filling in other areas of your board and can sometimes involve a small minigame, rolling dice, and even a bit of push your luck. But the different actions can allow you to do things like unlock point multipliers for the various columns of your sheep, gain access to those inaccessible sheep, modify your dice on future rounds, or even be able to mess with your opponent's sheep by making some of their sheep completely worthless. The game continues like this, with players filling in those sheep and taking advantage of those actions to try and score more victory points than their opponents, but there's also opportunity to score victory points in other ways, because each game's also going to have 3 different objective cards, and if players are able to complete the requirements of those cards, then they'll gain victory points for those as well. And of course, if this one sounds interesting to you, I will have a link down below, and you can click to get notified. And also launching on the 16th, we have a campaign that's going to be offering you 3 different games, and these games play very different from each other, but they do all share Greek thematic ties. These games are going to be known as Argonauts, Deus Ex Machina, and Troy the Card Games. First one we have is Argonauts, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 20 to 30 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative game where players are going to be sailing across the Mediterranean Sea in order to try and collect the Golden Fleece and return it back to their homeland. Players are going to be playing as those different Argonauts as they use that Argo to sail across the sea. And although players are working together, each player is going to be controlling their own squad of Argonauts, which each are going to have different stats and abilities, and they're going to be favored or cursed by different gods, which can help or hinder them in certain situations. In addition to the Argonauts, players are going to be managing a few different resources. One of these resources is known as your crew, and these are crew that are separate than your Argonaut cards. These are just represented by a track on the main map. But then there's also different resources like your money and your food, which you'll be using to feed your crew. Players are going to be beginning the game with a full crew, but absolutely no resources. But every single round, you're going to be moving down your food stores by 1. Unless you're not able to do so, then you're going to be losing 1 of your crew. Players will then be able to move their Argo 1 space forward on the map, and then you're going to be drawing an event card depending on what type of space you landed on. This can bring players to different ports where they can trade, rest, or perform other special actions, or they could find themselves in random encounters out on the ocean fighting against giant mythical beasts or finding other opportunities. But then there are also legendary encounter locations that could have you fighting against other demigods or titans that are just a little bit more powerful and will take a little bit more from the players in order to defeat. But whether or not players are trading or fighting, they're going to be exhausting cards from their hand in order to do so. This means that you're going to be limiting the cards you have in the future anytime that you're performing any actions in this game, which means that you really have to decide what you want to do so that you don't leave yourself too short if you run into trouble in the future. If that does happen, and it probably will, your ship is going to be taking damage, and players can lose the game if their ship takes too much damage, but you can also lose if you completely run out of crew. Otherwise, if players are able to collect that fleece and get back to their original location, then they win the game. And the next game offered in this campaign is called Deus Ex Machina. This plays 2 to 4 players. It takes about 25 to 30 minutes to play. And this one is actually a competitive game. And the way this game works is that each player is going to be playing as a different god. You're going to have a board to track your available strength and cunning, but you're going to be spending that to try and complete different objectives or battles throughout the game. Each player is also going to have 2 workers, and the game plays over a series of rounds, and each round players are going to be alternating putting one of their workers out on the various locations on the board. Each of these locations are going to offer one of 2 options. The player can either increase their stats by the amount indicated at that location, or instead they can choose to battle one of these cards located in the column in the center of the row. Each of these cards is going to have a certain amount of cunning and strength needed in order to overcome it. And you can get that by spending it from your own personal player board, but you can also use a hero card located on the rightmost column in order to add their strength and cunning to that battle. All these cards have icons on them as well, and of course to engage in one of these challenges, you're going to have to put your worker on a location that matches that specific icon. When it comes to the hero cards, you don't have to match the icons, but you will get a special bonus if you are able to match those as well. Each of the cards come with their own bonuses and stats depending on the cards that you're choosing, but they can also be augmented by different values that are printed on the board, depending on which space they got put into. The game continues like this, with players taking turns trying to complete as many of these challenges as possible in order to increase their victory points for the end of the game. But each player will also be able to increase their odds by taking advantage of their own specific ability cards that they'll be able to use throughout the game. And you can also get additional victory points if you are able to create different sets of these icons when you do complete those challenges. And these first 2 games that I just talked about have already been released in the past, and they do have expansions, and I believe all of that's going to be provided in the campaign, and there might be some new things added as well. But this next one here is a brand new entry, and it's called Troy and plays 2 players and takes about 15 to 20 minutes to play. And this one is more of your head-to-head skirmish. And the way that this game works is that players are either going to be playing as the Trojans or the Greeks, and you're going to be going up against each other trying to win a war. Players are going to be starting the game by placing some of their units from their hand into a row at the center of the table. And you're going to be initially putting these face down, and then players will be able to place a limited number of bolster cards in order to increase the value of some of those cards. Those cards are then going to be revealed and resolved with players using their strength to try and defeat their opponent's cards. But there is more to this battle because players will also each have their own heroes, as well as some divine powers from the gods. These will be able to be taken advantage of to swing the odds in your favor in various ways and perform various special actions. And this is going to take place over 4 rounds, with players gaining victory points depending on if they won that battle. But then at the end of the game, players are going to be going head-to-head with their heroes and the powers of the gods to have one final epic clash. The players whose army prevails wins the game, and you can find a link to this campaign in the description below, and of course click to get notified. And launching on October 17th, we have Fall of Lumen, and this plays 1 to 4 players. It takes about 80 to 150 minutes to play. And this one is a deck building game where players are going to be playing as their own individual heroes with their own special ability. But then you're also going to be choosing a faction along with its ability that you'll be able to upgrade throughout the game. Players are going to be starting with some starting resources depending on the combination of hero and faction that they chose. And then each player is of course going to get a starting deck as well, which they will be able to upgrade and modify throughout the game. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I do want to mention that this one is a competitive game, but it also offers a solo mode and a 2-player cooperative mode. And in this game, players are going to be trying to infiltrate and gain influence over the city of Lumen. This city is a dominant power in the world, and it also just happens to be a floating city that's going to be moving from location to location all over the board. Almost all the actions in this game involve either gaining resources or converting those resources into other resources or even into cards or additional units. The main board's broken into a bunch of different locations that players can visit to perform different location actions or gain specific cards to that location, because there's trinkets, spells, artifacts, and allies, with some of these being more powerful than others, and some of them going into your deck while others might remain in play. In order to interact with the city of Lumen, you need to be on that location where it is currently located, because like I said, it is going to be moving throughout the game. But it is one of the primary goals of the game, and anytime you are able to do this, you're going to be moving one of your units up into this board, which represents the influencers of Lumen, which is going to unlock permanent abilities for you for the rest of the game. But in order to do that, you need a unit called a Keeper. But this is a game that plays over a series of rounds, with players drawing a new hand of cards from their deck each and every round. Players are going to be performing actions on their turn, but they can also take advantage of their faction or their hero's special abilities. And the different actions available to you are the location-specific actions, where you'll be able to convert resources for other resources or cards. But then, of course, there are the cards in your hand, which are going to either offer you one of two choices. You can either discard that card for its resource that is indicated on it, or instead you can perform the card's special ability. And yes, some of these cards do allow you to gain keepers in various ways. But each region will also have a limited number of challenge cards, and players can try to fulfill these cards by fulfilling the requirements and resources in order to complete it. And if you do complete enough of these in a single region, it will guarantee that you get a keeper from that region. But players may also want to capture patrols in order to gain basic units, because most of the conversions in this game in order to get a keeper will involve first getting a basic unit, which you'll then upgrade. After all the players have performed their actions, an event card is going to be drawn, which is going to have all sorts of different effects, but it's going to be moving the city of Lumen to a new location out on the board. And this is going to continue for 6 rounds, with players using their cards for resource generation as well as resource conversion, as well as taking advantage of those location-specific actions, trying to gain keepers to infiltrate that always moving city of Lumen in order to get them out onto the Lumen board to unlock special abilities and victory points, and also build up your engine as the game goes on. And of course, the player that gains the most victory points at the end wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, I do have it linked in the description below. And launching on the 17th, we have Molly House, and this plays 1 to 5 players. It takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is the next game from Whirligig Games, which is most known for creating PAX Premier, but they also created John Company and now Molly House. And this is coming from the designer Cole Worley, which is also known for creating games like Root, although he wasn't the original designer of this game, and he is co-developing it with the designer Joe Kelly. But this is a game where players are going to be playing as various Mollys. And I wasn't familiar with this term, but I think it's used to reference someone who is interested in things like drag or anything related to gender bending. The players start the game with their Molly and the associated special ability, and then players are going to be drafting cards which represent different gestures, desires, and encounters that were frowned upon by the Society of the Reformation of Manners at that time, which, yes, was a real group. These cards will allow players to do things like host festivities or engage in all sorts of their wonderful vices, but of course at the risk of being arrested, because all these activities were considered illegal at that time. And some of these activities might attract more attention than others, which of course comes with additional risk. In order to do all this, players are going to be using the action cards located out at the center of the board. These different cards work essentially like worker placement locations, because players are going to be placing their pawns out on these cards in order to perform the major and minor actions of that card. But the nice thing about these being cards is that they can be swapped and changed throughout the game, which is something that will be happening round to round. But of course, depending on the action that you choose, you might be able to host those festivities that I mentioned before, like drag shows, masquerades, or many others. And you can also spend resources and cards from your hand in order to augment those experiences and make them even better. But another main action you'll find in this game is the action to go cruising, and there's various locations where you can go cruising on the board, with some of these locations having more police patrols than others. More police, of course, means more risk, but it also means more fun, and that is the main point of this game, because players are trying to create joy. Players are trying to create their own personal joy, but they're also trying to create a shared joy for all of the mollies in the land. This, of course, increases your standing across the mollies and is going to open up other opportunities as you play throughout the game. And a really neat mechanism that comes along with the theme of sharing in this game is the way that the trading works, because players can trade resources and cards throughout this game, but players will also have access to different contract tokens, and they can use those to trade as well, which basically gives players an IOU, or a promise of something in the future that must be binding. So if you trade with me and I give you that contract, you can call in that favor at any time that you want in order to do the action on that contract. A really cool mechanism here that I would love to see in more games. But as players are playing through this game and cycling through the rounds, there's going to be different events and actions that happen between the rounds, and this could trigger a roll of the arrest die. There are other things that can trigger this roll as well, depending on actions that players perform and the outcomes of those actions. And there are a bunch of different ways that players can get arrested, but anytime that you're rolling this arrest die, you're going to be checking on the round tracker and seeing what value you need to get below in order to not get arrested. If you do roll above that value and you are caught by the police, then you're going to have to draw as many arrest cards as equal to your current standing with the molly houses. Whenever you do this, you're going to have to pick the worst card that you drew and then activate that card. And these cards can come in a few different types. The best one to get are the acquitted cards, but then there is also the arrested cards. Then the worst one is the death cards, because this was a crime punishable by death, which is absolutely terrible, but it is part of the history, and that's why it's included in this game. But in addition to these three different types of cards, there is also a fourth one that you can optionally choose amongst the cards, which is to become an informer. And whenever you choose this card, you pretend like it was something else, but then your win condition is going to be changing and you're going to be trying to get the other mollies caught. Of course, like the other Whirligig games, this one does have a lot more complexities to it, and I'm just doing the broad strokes here to give you an idea of how it plays in a very short amount of time. But if you do want to learn more, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below, and of course you can click that notify me button in order to get notified once it launches. And also launching on the 17th, we have the Morrison Game Factory, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 2 to 4 hours to play through the entire thing. And the reason I say it that way is because this one is more of an escape room style game where players are going to be working together to solve a mystery. This is a game that doesn't come with very complicated rules, and you can actually just start playing right away by grabbing the starting letter and reading through it, and then just solving the puzzles that are presented to you. There's going to be a bunch of different puzzles provided in this game, and there are hints provided as well if any of them are too difficult, but there's going to be a wide range of puzzles and narrative for players to explore and discover, because in this game, an urban explorer has uncovered the start of a mystery in an abandoned game factory and sent you the items and info needed to continue that investigation. Players are also going to be utilizing some household items as well as digital elements that the game provides, and players will be using all of this in order to solve the various puzzles. This one is being created by a team that does have quite a lot of experience creating these styles of games, and they did mention that this one is designed to be a little bit more entry level, so if you haven't tried these style of games before, this could be a really great choice, but it'll still provide a lot of fun puzzle solving if you're just a fan of the genre. This does make it a great choice for younger players as well, and if this one does sound interesting to you, you can find it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 17th, we have the Gilded Realms. This plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 180 minutes to play. And I personally think this game looks like a lot of fun. It's really cool because this is actually a kingdom building game where players are going to be building up their own individual kingdoms. And you're going to be building towns and fields and using cards to represent different advisors and units, with some of them being more on the aggressive side, while others might be more on the defensive, while others might just be more focused on your economy. But a really neat aspect here is that your main kingdom board is going to be represented by a whole bunch of different boards that you'll be able to swap out and improve throughout the game. These are going to be located at the bottom of your player board, with players using those for resource generation and to perform different actions and assign units to throughout the game. And a really fun feature that comes along with this is that as you're swapping out these boards for other boards as you improve on your kingdom, this is actually going to be coming with some additional visual cues, because each board will have more artwork depicting your kingdom growing and expanding as you swap those boards into your overall panorama. And this image shows that happening, and you can also see how you can add and expand to those individual boards by adding cards below that section of your kingdom. But this is a game that plays over several ages that you're going to be tracking on this longer central board here that's going to be at the center of the table. And then at the start of each age, players are going to be drawing 3 quest cards and then choosing one to add to their kingdom. This is going to be dictating the ideology and the goals of your kingdom, but it's also going to be granting you with certain strengths. Players are also going to be drafting cards in order to gain new cards into their deck or their tableau, which they'll be trying to synergize with their goals and the other cards. Each age in this game is going to be broken into a few different phases, which is all outlined on each player's player board, with the first phase being the build phase. And it's during this point in the game where players will be able to spend any resources that they have in order to build the cards and units that they have in their hand. Whenever you do that, you put it into your tableau, which is located on the right-hand side of your board. But the cool thing about this tableau is that this is actually a moving tableau. Each of the cards that you're able to build do take some time in order to be built, and every single round you're going to be moving all your cards down one space on that tableau, and then once they completely come off your board, that means that they are fully built and you can put them into your kingdom. There are some ways that you can expedite this, either by spending resources or performing special actions, or even performing additional actions by exhausting some of your townsfolk. This does make you more vulnerable to attacks if you choose to take this method, but you can restore those townsfolk later by providing resources in order to feed them. But once players have taken all the actions that they want or can, you're going to be moving into the event phase, where each player is going to be choosing a stance in secret. And there's 3 different types of stances that players can take. They can either take a worker stance, a defensive stance, or an attack stance. All the players choose these in secret and then simultaneously reveal, and anyone who chose the worker stance is going to be able to assign that to one of their kingdom boards, increasing that specific area of your kingdom's production once you get into the production phase at the end of the round. For anyone that chose the attack phase, they'll be able to attack any in-game threats or even the other opponents, and in order to do that, you're going to be taking any of your fully built units, adding their strength to your side, and then trying to overcome the strength of your opponent. And that's going to, of course, gain you all sorts of different resources if you're attacking the in-game threats, but otherwise you'll be able to take certain items from your opponents within the specifications of the rules. But of course, you can also choose the defense stance, which is going to protect you against the other players, but also against those in-game threats, because there's going to be points in the game where threats start to become very looming, and you do want to be prepared for them because they can be quite catastrophic. And that comes into play at the end of this phase, where you're going to be revealing that event card, which can cause all sorts of in-game effects, looming threats, or even actual attacks. And when players do spend their military units to either attack or defend, anytime that you're doing that, it goes back into your tableau and needs to go through that whole cooldown process before you have access to it again. If you are attacked and you're not able to defend against it with your military, then you're going to have to start discarding some of your gold or overworking your population. But luckily, we then move into the production phase, where players will then be able to activate each area of their kingdom from left to right, gaining the benefits and resources that their kingdom provides. The game continues like this until all the ages have completed, and then of course the player with the most victory points wins the game. And if you share my tastes and think this one looks really cool, you can find a link to it in the description below, and of course click that notify me on launch button. And also launching on the 17th, we have Breaking Moon, which plays 2 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive game where an asteroid has shattered the moon, sending Earth into a worldwide flood as players work to build a space station in order to save humanity. Players are going to be playing this game as different heroes with their own unique special abilities, but then on a turn, players are going to be using worker placement to perform various actions. The interesting thing here is that there are a bunch of different action locations out on the board, but some of these will actually become unusable at certain points in the game as certain events happen and the world begins to flood, essentially making those locations no longer accessible. But generally, players will be using actions in order to airlift resources from across the globe, research tech and gain new tech cards, which they'll be able to use for their special abilities and effects, and then also rescue survivors. This is a really important aspect of the game because anytime that you're rescuing survivors, you're going to be adding them to the side of your board. But the side of your board also corresponds to the current flood levels of the world, and you always need to keep your survivors above that flood level. Once they reach the top of your board, they're essentially ready to get to the space station. And once you complete your space station, you'll be able to cash in the victory points for rescuing those people. The game continues like this over a series of rounds with players using their workers to perform various actions. And then, of course, the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, I do have it linked in the description below. Also on the 17th, we have a new campaign for the game FlickFleet, which is called the FlickFleet A Box of Pirate Flicks. And this is a game for 2 players. It takes about 10 to 30 minutes to play. And this is a game that I did cover in the past, and it's also a game that I personally think looks like a ton of fun. I did cover this one previously, but instead of rolling that footage, I'll just re-record this one because I filmed that one a long time ago and I think I can do a much better job now. But essentially, this is a game that's going to be offering a whole bunch of different types of ships and obstacles that players are going to be flicking or trying to avoid as they play this game. The game offers a whole bunch of different scenarios with players having different types of ships going up against each other, with some of these ships specializing in combat while others might be used for various other abilities. But the way this game works is that players are essentially going to be taking turns, activating each of the ships, performing 2 actions for that ship. An action generally is moving and attacking, but there are some other abilities as well. This is a game where the usually very basic and boring action of moving is actually quite a lot of fun because anytime that you're moving a ship, you actually have to flick it to where you want it to go in order to try and get it into position. But whenever you do this, there are a few things to be aware of because, yes, you can ram other players' ships, but you do have to declare this before you do it. Otherwise, it's going to end in catastrophe for you with you blowing up your ship, but still causing a bit of damage. But also, if you flick your ship outside the bounds of your play area, then it also just drifts off into space and you lose your ship. But then there could also be various obstacles that you're trying to avoid, like in this example where there's some floating asteroids. But then one last thing is that when you flick a ship, you have to flick the ship from its thrusters, which means that each ship is going to have different requirements in the ways that you can flick it, and you'll only be able to flick it at certain points on that actual token. And if you also think that moving your ship sounds like a ton of fun in this game, then you'll also enjoy firing its cannons, because anytime that you attack another ship, you're actually going to be flicking either a die or some type of token, depending on the ammunition that your ship uses, and then just putting that on your ship and then flicking it towards your opponent. But what that die or token actually hits is completely up to your flick, and you could even end up firing at yourself. Each of your ships also has an accompanying card that's going to outline the different actions that are available to you, as well as the makeup of your ship and how you can flick it, and also the damage it can do and the dice and tokens that it will be using for attacks. Some ships can have shields that will defend them from incoming hits, and then another action that you can use to recharge that shield. But then there's options for different attacks and dice and tokens, even on a single ship that might have multiple different weapons. But then some ships could also be used to deploy other ships out on the board. And some of these ships can also take damage to the different areas of the ship, making the action associated with that location no longer available unless you also have the engineering action, which allows you to repair other parts of your ship, assuming that part of your ship wasn't damaged. This campaign is going to be introducing a new expansion with the pirate fleet of ships, but it's also going to be offering pretty much everything that they released previously, but a lot of it will be in limited stock, so if you are interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along with it. And there will also be some reprint stretch goals, allowing for some of these out-of-print modules and expansions to be also included in this campaign. Just be careful with this one because there are quite a bit of add-ons and it can get quite expensive with everything that you can add on to your pledge. But I think you'll be happy with whatever you pledge for this game if it does look like a game that you'd be interested in. And if you are interested in it, you can find a link to it in the description below. Also on the 17th, we have a new expansion for the game Marvel Dice Throne, which plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 20 to 40 minutes to play. And this expansion is the X-Men and Marvel Dice Throne Missions expansion. The X-Men expansion is just going to be introducing a bunch of new heroes and villains related to the X-Men franchise that's going to be introduced to the game, which you can mix in with the original Dice Throne. And then the Dice Throne Missions is going to be a brand new cooperative experience where players will be able to play both as the X-Men or non-X-Men characters as they play through these various missions. This means that you can use your existing characters if you already own Marvel Dice Throne in order to use this new co-op mode. But it is going to be introducing a bunch of new components, so you will need to get this expansion in order to do it. But it's going to be introducing 12 base scenarios into this co-op mode with a variety of difficulty and length, with different objectives and bonus objectives that players can try to complete as they play throughout that mode. And there will also be a final boss that players will have to go up against. What's neat about this is that all players can play simultaneously and then resolve their offensive rolls in order, and then the enemy activates through a new set of dice that's going to be included with this module. There's also going to be a new mechanism and resource included in this module, which is called Momentum, which you'll be able to gain and spend in order to take advantage of different effects, as well as gain allies, and then spend that to also level up to gain additional effects. Because this one is an expansion to the existing Dice Throne, which also launched on Kickstarter, I did already cover that and offer footage on how that one plays. So if you do want to know more about this and have some more information, I do have a link down below, but I will go ahead and roll my previous footage for you now. And just like with every other Dice Throne, the rules for this one is going to be the same, and you're going to be able to choose a hero from a variety of heroes that each have their own asymmetrical hero board and leaflet, which outlines their abilities and their ultimate attacks. And for each character, players will also get a health tracker, a combat points tracker, a deck of cards, and 5 dice. And on a player's turn, they'll draw 1 card from their deck, and then they'll also gain 1 combat point. And combat points are kind of like a currency that allow you to play certain cards throughout the game. And the active player can play as many actions as they want in any order, and there's 3 actions that a player can perform. The first one is to discard any of their cards in order to gain some combat points, or they can pay the cost to play a hero upgrade card that they currently have in their hand. And the way that those work is that each upgrade is going to match an ability on your player board, and if you pay the cost for that upgrade, then you're going to replace that ability on your player board by putting your new card on top of it. So these upgrades will augment the abilities that you already have. And the third action is that you can play any amount of action cards, and to do that you just pay the cost and then perform the action. And then you're going to roll your 5 dice, and you can re-roll any amount of your dice up to 2 times. And then you can play any one of your offensive abilities. But each of these abilities also have requirements, and in order to play any of these abilities, you would have had to roll the appropriate dice in order to fulfill that requirement. So this might mean that you need certain icons or a certain sequence of numbers. If you're just playing a 2-player game, then you're just simply attacking your opponent player, but if there's any more than 2 players, then you're going to roll a die to determine your target. Some dice rolls dictate the player that you have to attack, while other dice rolls might give the option up to the players. This different colored ability in the bottom right is actually your defense ability, and if you're ever attacked, you can try and defend against that attack. Although some attacks can't be defended against, and you're also going to have to roll your dice in order to fulfill the requirements of that ability. Once you've completed your attack, you can perform any of those 3 actions I mentioned before as much as you like once again, and this is going to allow you to brace yourself for the next player's turns. Also launching on the 17th, we have a new expansion for the game Obsession. And if you're not familiar with this game, this is a game that is in the top 100 on Board Game Geek. And the original game played 1 to 4 players, but with this new expansion it does play 1 to 6 and takes about 30 to 180 minutes to play. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is a game where players are going to be playing as different families, each with their own unique abilities, and players are going to be competing to try and increase their reputation the most by completing different objectives, gaining money, and courting the right people. Players are going to be starting the game with a hand of guests, and then on your turn you can choose to either take an active turn or a passive turn. If you take an active turn, you're going to be choosing one of the estate tiles located at the bottom of the board, and then you're going to be putting it into play on your board. This might come with some sort of resource requirements or guest requirements, but essentially what you're doing by doing this is that you're hosting an event in order to increase your reputation. You're then going to be choosing different guest cards from your hand in order to assign to that action, which can each have positive or negative effects or could chain together with other cards that you might have. But they essentially allow you to gain victory points or improve your stats. And then you may also have requirements with each of these guests, because guests do have requirements like butlers and servants that you will also need to provide. Of course, nobody wants to do the same event over and over again, so whenever you do complete this action, you're then going to be flipping that estate tile to the other side, which will have some different stats, usually resulting in some different effects and benefits if you were to host it again, but then any butlers and servants that you assign to it are then going to go down into a cooldown. And this is where performing the passive action can start to become very powerful, because anytime that you perform this action, you will be getting a bit of money injected into your supply, but you also get all of your servants and butlers back, and also any of the cards you had played will also return into your hand, because once you play a card, there is no way to get it back into your hand until you perform this action. Players essentially play over a series of rounds with different events happening throughout the game that can have different effects and opportunities for players to take advantage of. And this new expansion is going to be adding a bunch of new characters and events and tiles that you'll be able to mix into your game. And this is a game that's tried and true and well loved in the community. So if this does sound like a game that you might be interested in, I think you're going to have a lot of confidence in backing this one. And if you are interested in checking it out in any more detail, you can find the link in the description below. Also on the 17th, we have Carolingi, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 60 to 180 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive game where players are going to be moving through Europe trying to gain the most influence in order to win the game. Players start with one location under their control, but then each player is going to have their own personal player board where they're going to be keeping track of their 3 different levels of followers, which they'll be deploying and moving around on the board in order to gain influence and control. But these units can also be upgraded with various actions, because you do need certain units to perform various actions in the game, so you'll be moving them from the different types of followers so that you can be able to perform those various actions. Each round in this game is represented by a single year, which is broken down into 4 different seasons. Each season, players will be choosing 2 actions to perform, but then players will be using all of their actions through an entire year, because these actions are provided through action tokens. And every time that you choose your 2 actions for a season, you're actually going to be putting them into a bag with all the other players' actions as well as some different event tokens that can be drawn as well. And when those are drawn, you're going to be drawing an event card and following the effects. But the neat thing about this is that there isn't any player order, because players are just going to get their actions whenever their token is drawn from the bag, in whichever order those tokens are drawn. But these tiles allow for all sorts of different actions, like leveling up your followers, moving followers from one country to an adjacent country, or even deploying followers from your personal board out onto the main board by assigning them to these cards that will be appearing around the perimeter of the board. And once that card reaches the limit of followers that it can hold, then all the followers on that card are going to be put on the associated country. Players also have action tiles that allow them to develop on areas that they control, which will help them feed their followers if there is a hunger event. And then there is also an action that helps you remove rebel gangs or opponents from areas that you have a majority in, because each country does start out with a rebel faction, and these do increase throughout the game, and those are going to get in your way if they happen to get more of their cubes there than you have, essentially relinquishing your control over that country, which then will limit some of the actions that you can perform. But when an event tile is drawn, an event card is going to be drawn from the event deck, and these can have all sorts of different effects, like adding more cards around the perimeter of the board, adding more rebel gangs onto the various countries, or even causing a famine. And when a famine occurs, players are going to be checking each country that has any followers on it, and then you're going to be removing any followers that exceed the amount of developments on that country +1. Which of the player's followers actually gets removed depends on who has control over that country. But if there is a tie, then all the players are going to be losing their followers equally, even if that means losing more than what you need to get under that threshold. At the end of the round, all the players' tokens would be used, so all the players get their tokens back, but then there's other effects that can happen as well, like adding more event tiles into the bag, which can make those happen more frequently, but then also you could potentially be adding more event cards shuffled into the deck, which can add some other possibilities. The game continues like this until one of the win conditions are met, and that's either controlling enough areas, having enough followers or developments on the board, or just getting enough points. Whenever you do this, you're actually going to be putting your win token into the bag, and if you still fulfill that win condition once that tile actually gets drawn, then you do win the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, I'll have links in the description below. Also launching on the 18th, we have DeepSix, a game of galactic mayhem, and this is a game of fast-paced combat and head-to-head area control, where players will be deploying different units and trying to control different regions on the map. It has a really interesting mechanism, the way that the control works, where you have some of your tiles representing control of one player and some representing control of the other, and you can steal control from the other players, but then there are neutral tiles that are a little bit easier to get under your control. This is also a campaign that I thought was launching a few weeks back, so I did already cover this one, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. In this game, each player is going to have their own leader character as well as a bunch of other units, but the main board is going to be set up with a bunch of different tiles, and the different colors represent either one player's territory or the other player's, or either a neutral territory that can be claimed by either player easily, but you can also defeat units in your opponent's territory to take that for yourself as well. On a player's turn, they'll be placing their units onto the various tiles and expanding their territory, and also issuing combat against their opponents by rolling dice and trying to defeat those units to take that territory for themselves. Players can also gain powerful glyph cards for special abilities and one-time effects that they'll be able to use to their advantage, and each round there will also be different events that can occur that can shift the tiles around and cause a little bit of disorder that the players will have to work with. Not a whole lot more info on this one, but it is really interesting with the way that the territory works and the way that it's tracked, and it looks like there's a bunch of different ways that you can set up the board, adding a lot of variety from game to game. So if this one does sound interesting to you, you can check out their website, which will link to their campaign, and I'll have that linked in the description below. Also launching on the 18th, we have Ezra and Nehemiah, which plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 90 to 120 minutes to play. And this is the next game from Boardgames, and it is co-designed by Shem Phillips, which have created quite a lot of famous games, with many of them being in the top 100 on BGG, including the Architects of the West Kingdom series and the newer South Tigris series as well. But this one looks like it's going to be standing alone outside those series, but it does look like it shares a lot of those similar elements that you might find in those types of games. In this game, players are going to be playing as leaders of the Israelites as they are working to rebuild Jerusalem. Each player is going to have their own personal player board where they're going to be inserting some variable tiles and using those tiles as worker placement locations as well as locations for resource generation. The players are each going to have a hand of cards that they're going to be managing, and on their turn they're going to be playing these cards onto their own personal player board. Each of these cards is going to have a bunch of different opportunities on it, but the main thing that you're looking at here is the different colored banners in the top left corner. Each of these are going to be associated with one of the 3 types of actions, and in order to perform certain actions of that type, you're going to need a certain amount of ribbons of that color. Whenever you play these onto your board, you're actually going to be adding the total number of that color together in order to contribute towards that action, which means that if you want to perform a blue action, it's good to have as many blue banners on your board as possible, but of course that will limit the possible actions since you'll only have one specific color. I really like this mechanism because it means that you're going to have to actively plan for the actions that you want to perform, because you only have 3 card locations on your board, so you're going to have to remove and replace these cards anytime that you play a new card. And these different actions that players can perform are to clear rubble and rebuild the walls and gates of Jerusalem, which will gain you victory points and resources. Or players can also gain special abilities by paying the cost and assigning a worker to this grid of tiles out on the board. And an interesting thing about this is that once you have one of your workers out on this board, you do have to connect your workers together when you do buy another ability. If you don't make a direct connection, you can actually connect through the other players as well, but you do have to pay them in order to do so. There's also actions players can perform to trade food and workers for other resources, but then you can also place those resources with another action on the various altars and temples, which will also give you different victory points and rewards for just placing that resource on that altar or temple, with some of these different locations offering you other opportunities like completing rows and columns for even more benefits, or moving up various tracks. Certain icons can also move your tent around this loop, or different tokens up various tracks, gaining you rewards depending on where you move to. At the end of your round, you're going to be choosing one of the cards on your board to put into permanent effect into a tableau to the right of your board to build up your engine and make you more powerful as the game goes on. The game continues like this, and the player with the most victory points at the end of the 6 rounds wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, you can check it out. I'll have the links to the campaign in the description below. And launching on the 19th, we have The Witcher, The Path of Destiny. This plays 1 to 5 players. It takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And this is a game where players are going to be playing through a series of tales. Each of these tales is going to be providing some unique rules and components that are specific to that tale. And you can also tailor the difficulty depending on how difficult you want it to be. But what's really interesting about these tales is they're actually going to be made up of a deck of cards. Not all the cards are going to be used in every single tale, because these do have some branching paths and there's going to be different decisions being made as you play throughout this game, which means that you will get different results even if you do decide to play the same tale a second or even third time. But this is a game that plays over 3 rounds, with each round having players voting on which path to take down the story. Players are going to be playing action cards with different icons, and the dominant icon is going to be the deciding factor on which path is chosen, earning those players victory points while giving all the other players experience points. Players will be playing as different characters from the Witcher series, and players will be able to use those experience points to unlock special abilities for their specific character. The nice thing here is that if you completely max out your experience points, then you'll start using those experience points in order to gain victory points. But in order to get those action cards that you'll be using throughout this game, players are going to be drafting cards at the start of each round. The way this works is that each player is going to be assigning their token to one of the rows of 2 action cards, and then you'll be able to take those action cards into your hand. The only catch here is that the place that you place your pawn also dictates your player order for the following turn. Players will then be choosing 2 cards in secret to place face down in front of them, and then this is going to continue with players drawing 2 cards and going through these motions again until you have done this for 3 turns. Then all your cards will be revealed, and you're going to be activating them from left to right. All these cards are going to be providing you with all sorts of different benefits, but your final vote is going to be determined by whichever icon is most prominent across all your cards. This means that you're going to have to decide which cards you want to play based on the action it provides, but also the vote that you want to issue. A really neat feature here is that you'll actually be able to choose 1 or 2 of your cards to keep in your tableau for the following round, so that you do have a little bit more added to your actions once you move on to that next round. But then you also need to keep in mind that those icons are going to be carrying forward, potentially helping or hindering what you want your next vote to be. Like I said, players will be gaining victory points if their path is the one that's chosen, but players can also gain additional victory points by completing different side quests that will be offered throughout the game by completing different objectives that those side quests require. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game, and if you are interested in this one, you can find a link to the campaign in the description below. And launching on the 20th, we have The Establishment Inner Workings of the Secret Cabal. And this plays 3 to 5 players and takes about 60 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is a card-based, story-driven role-playing game about a secret society that's controlling the future of the spacefaring humanity. In this game, players are going to be choosing a faction and gaining the associated cards, and then players will also be drafting a separate hand of cards that you're going to be combining with your faction in order to help you roleplay your specific faction. The game plays over 4 rounds with 3 branching storylines, where a single storyline card gives players information about their current situation and the 2 options that there are to vote on, and then players are going to be placing their influencers on the side that they favor on any of the 3 storyline cards. The total value is going to be the deciding factor for the results of those votes, but players can also gain additional bonuses by matching certain icons together. But of course, this isn't really a game about winning, it's more a game about role-playing and telling a story. So as long as players are having fun and continuing through the story, then the game is essentially a success, but players will want to try and work towards a fitting goal to their faction. So if they are able to get there, then I think there is just a little bit more of a win for those individual players that are able to do so. As always, if you want to check it out, I do have links in the description below. That's everything I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still got a few awesome giveaways to announce. And the first one we have is for a pledge for the game Erune, Light and Darkness, which is a dungeon crawling game that offers a few different modes of play. You can either play one versus many or completely cooperative. I think there are some other modes as well. But this is essentially a game that does come with an accompanied app that does allow players to play this one cooperatively. Otherwise, there is one player acting as the Masters of Shadows, and they're essentially going to be controlling the dungeon and also the monsters within that dungeon to try and thwart the efforts of the other players. The players are going to be playing through a story and performing different actions and building up their tech tree to try and level up and win the game and to continue on the story. But something that I really like about this game is that players can actually make pacts with the Master of Shadows, which will give them some sort of benefit in the immediate. But as you play the game, there's going to be certain things that are happening that are going to be gaining different benefits towards the Masters of Shadow for you having taken that pact. A massive amount of content here on the campaign page, so if you want to see any more, definitely feel free to check it out. But there's a ton of stretch goals reached and a ton of miniatures that you'll be able to include as well. This giveaway is a really nice one that's going to get you the expansion pledge as well as the core box, and I just want to thank the publisher for including both of those as part of this giveaway. And to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Erune, and you can say anything that you like, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could tell us what scares you most about the shadows. Or we can just make it simple and say what scares you most when you're in the dark. For myself, whenever I'm walking through the house with the lights off, I always have one hand over my head because I'm bald and I'm frightened about hitting my head. You can never be too careful. And the next giveaway is for a game that I've heard a lot of positive things about, and this one is called Davy Jones' Locker. And this is a game that plays over 2 phases. It is a cooperative game, but during the first phase, you're going to be sailing around and trying to gather different resources to help prepare you for the final battle. The original game had you fighting against a kraken, whereas this new one introduces a banshee and its army of ghost ships. Players will be trying to fight that final boss with the resources that they collected in the first half of the game. But what makes this expansion interesting is that the power of the final boss depends on how long you spent in that initial phase. So you do kind of want to spend some time there to gather and prepare, but you don't want to take too much time because that's going to be making the final boss more powerful. And this is another awesome giveaway because this publisher also decided to donate a pledge for both the core box as well as the new expansion, so thank you so much for that. But to enter this giveaway, we're going to do the exact same thing here. All you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Davy, but just make sure it's spelled D-A-V-Y. There's no E in this one. And you can say anything that you want, but if you are looking for a particular theme, maybe you could let us know what scares you the most about being out on the sea. I really like these scary themed giveaways for October. For myself, there's really not too much to worry about in Canadian waters. We don't really have really scary animals or fish or anything like that, but I have been in deep water in other countries of the world, and it's kind of just the fear of the unknown. When you're in a new location and you can't see the bottom, you kind of feel like there's going to be a whale or shark that's just going to come up and eat you in a single bite at any moment. But I'm pretty good at suppressing it and pretending like everything's fine. Good luck in the giveaways, but now let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaways. And we had 3 to go over. We had Cretaceous Rails, Hello Kitty Day at the Park, and Mini One Deck Game and Scorecards. This one was run over on the Discord, so if you did enter that one, just make sure that you check your Discord notifications to see if you were chosen. But other than that, let's go ahead and draw for Cretaceous Rails first. And to draw a winner, I'll use this application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you do like this content and you do appreciate the work and time I put into it, and you're able to show your support through Patreon, I really do appreciate it. It does make a massive difference for me. And just for fun, if you are wondering how long these videos take for me to film, I started filming this at, let's see here, get over here. Started filming here at 9:13. And it's currently 3 a.m. And I also spend about 30 minutes per game when I'm doing my research and notes, and then I also still have to condense and edit all this footage, which I'll be doing tomorrow morning sometime. I have seen a few comments out there from a few of you guessing how long it takes for me to make these videos, and I've never actually said it before, and I've never actually corrected any of you in the comments either. So if you were wondering what that number actually is, you can do the math here. I don't want to know. But I do enjoy making these videos, and I especially enjoy the community that we have, so it is a lot more than just that. I just wish I didn't have so much work to do outside of these videos, which makes me stay up till 3 a.m. filming when I know it's not the most healthy thing to do. But I've survived this long, and who needs to sleep every night anyway? But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw the winner for Cretaceous Rails. And the winner is James Estes. I'm going to assume I said that correctly. So congratulations, James. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Cretaceous Rails. Now let's go ahead and draw the pledge for Hello Kitty. So we'll do the exact same thing here. Just swap Dino out for Kitty. Grab those comments and draw a winner. And the winner is what? Where'd it go? Okay, well, we saw the winner there was Coke Lead, so congratulations on the win. The reason that I clicked on your comment is because I was trying to navigate to it because I saw the word dino there, but I didn't see the word kitty. But when I pull it up on my actual YouTube studio, I do see it there. So I just thought that it was drawing incorrectly or that I didn't change the hashtag correctly, but everything looks good. And also, you did win a pledge before I remember your name, so congratulations on winning again. Really cool to see a person win twice from the comment section. I know you've been commenting for a while, and I really do appreciate it, so I hope that this inspires some hope for those of you that have been commenting but haven't won yet. The odds are actually pretty good. If you do comment consistently enough, there is a really good chance that you will end up winning at some point. But congratulations on the win. Just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com and we'll get that pledge all sorted out for you. And that's everything I have for you this week, and I do feel a little bit behind on my costume selection for Halloween this year. I haven't picked anything yet, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave that in your comment as well. I'm really interested to see what kind of ideas we can come up with. This is the first Halloween since I've moved into this house, so I'm hoping to make a good first impression. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Oh.